Hi, welcome to the official YouTube channel for the English Language Project. Today we're going to talk about where English comes from. For a very, very long time, folks have been wondering where their tongue came from. One of the earliest records of this can be found in Herodotus. Before the Persian War struck Athens and its fellow cities in the 480s and 490 BCE, the Egyptians wanted to know which tongue came first. They put together a fairly simple test that would foretell the history of the earliest tongue out there. They reared two boys who were never to hear a single word throughout the test. For the first few years, no one could say a word to them. At last, each of them would say their first words on their own. The outcome of this would shock the Egyptians deeply. Both of the boys wound up saying the very same word, bekos, which means a loaf of bread in the Phrygian tongue. Now, although this test today would not only be thought of as wrong, but even unethical, the curiosity was already there. As years went by and methods for looking into the origins of tongues became better, folks began to uncover the thitherto mysterious origins of the world's languages. Of course, many folks have wondered the very same thing about our own tongue, English. In today's video, we're going to go into the truths, as well as the misconceptions folks have about their own mother tongue. Our tale begins 2,500 years ago in what is today Denmark and southern Sweden. The speakers of the tongue in this great swath of land spoke Proto-Germanic, the tongue that would go on to beget every other living Germanic tongue alive today, including English, Dutch, German, Swedish, Norwegian, and Icelandic. All these different tongues are separated by how they split off from one another. For all the living Germanic tongues out there today, we can separate them into being either belonging to the northern branch or the western branch. Whilst tongues like English, Dutch, and German can be thought of as belonging to the western branch, tongues like Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and Icelandic all come from the northern branch. And, over the course of 2,500 years, all this managed to unfold into the tree of tongues that you see before yourself now. From the earliest point in time of Germanic history, we have Proto-Germanic, which was spoken somewhere around southern Sweden and Denmark. This was spoken around 500 BCE. Later on, this gave rise to Old English, around 400 to 1100 CE. This was the tongue spoken by the Anglo-Saxons. Although there are some competing theories out there for how Middle English came about, the most name-known one is that it came about naturally from Old English, with a heavy deal of French influence from the Norman invasion of 1066. Middle English was spoken somewhere around 1100 to 1550, and is somewhat understandable, even for modern speakers of English, with no background in the study whatsoever. Next comes Early New English, which was spoken by Shakespeare and others from 1550 to 1700 or so. Early New English is very much akin to the modern speech that we have today. Although it still kept some of the older features of English, such as words like thou, these were going by the wayside and quickly. Lastly, we have New English, which has been spoken since 1700 and is spoken now all over the world. Naturally, you might be wondering how exactly we know for sure where these tongues come from, as well as why we put them into the branches that we do. As an example, why is it that we don't just put English into this northern branch up here, rather than keeping it down with the western tongues? How can we be so certain about all of this? The answer to this question can take a lot of time and explanation in order to fully help the asker understand everything that goes on in historical linguistics. Nevertheless, let's still dive in and see what there is at the simplest level of this craft. If you're still interested at the end of this video for some more historical linguistics, I would like to hear it in a more fleshed out way. Here are some great videos on the topic. To understand how these seemingly different tongues could be linked together in some deeper way, we first need to understand sound shift laws. We're going to go through one of the most, if not the most, name-known sound shift laws out there, Grimm's Law. Grimm's Law basically states the following. F becomes f, t becomes th, and k becomes h. There are many other rules associated with Grimm's Law, but these are just a few. Now, this is a very simplified version of what is really going on, but it'll do for today. Since this is a bit hard to understand from afar, let's go through some examples of this lore being used in action. One of the most name-known words that folks like to use to show this lore in action is the word father. As we can see on the chart, many of the different tongues have a word that seems to be similar, but has some kind of difference. One of the big ones is letter P instead of the letter F. If we want to say that these two words are linked though, how could we account for this? Well, if we look at the chart given us by Grimm's Law, we'll see that P's in other tongues will become F's in the Germanic tongues. But we don't just see that in the word father. Let's look at some other words to see this in action. And this is no coincidence. As it turns out, Grimm's lore applies to English and all the other Germanic tongues throughout. This kind of genetic kinship between tongues that spans not only over a few words but throughout a whole tongue can help linguists understand the greater kinships between languages. Whilst that was only a very elementary introduction to historical linguistics, hopefully you will now have a better understanding of where English stands amongst the world's tongues, as well as how we can so easily put it into the branches that we do. Linguistics is perhaps one of the least understood sciences out there, which is a shame. When we understand our tongues, as well as how they fit in with the rest of the world, we gain priceless knowledge and understanding of the world's cultures, the importance of keeping tongues alive and well, as well as a greater understanding of the history of the words in an overall English.